Okay, Terrance, thank you very much for that very stimulating discourse on what's happening in the regulatory space internationally and then bringing it closer to home. So we'll move into our panel discussion. And at the table, we have Ian T. Allen. Um, yes, I put a T in for a reason. Right. Ian currently lectures at on entrepreneurship at UTT, and he worked in the financial sector at RBTT Bank, now RBC, and at DFL. Right. So his tenure at those institutions um, comprised 9 years in IT and also in finance. In 2013, he found Paywise Limited, a secure and reliable payment solution for local businesses. We also have at the table Rhea Ching, who is the founder and executive director of Covela Foundation, a US registered nonprofit dedicated to the creation of technology enabled solutions in the Caribbean and Latin America. Ms. Yao Ching is an experienced executive and a passionate advocate of the use of technology to harness creative skills and resources of the Caribbean. And we heard that passion earlier as she contributed to the first session. She has worked. She's a seasoned professional, having spent over 20 years in the Kala region, serving executive roles in large multinational corporations. She is a member of the Open Data Institute and International Association of Innovation Professionals. We are also, okay, we're supposed to have another person remotely, Byron, but he's not on yet. If he comes on, well, we'll connect him. Okay, Terrance, you left us with a comment towards the end that in the region we are some ways away. And in my mind, I said some ways away, we are nowhere. And as we bring it home in the Caribbean space, how is it do we move forward rapidly? This morning, we heard a discussion about political will. Is that we need to have serious political will within the Caribbean region, amongst the Caribbean governments, in order to push us forward, because we're way, way, way behind. While we are talking, and analyzing, the rest of the world is moving ahead, right? And we're still, to my mind, nowhere. So is it that we need a lot more push from the political elements in order to really drive this conversation forward?
I think that the answer is pretty self-evident. At the end of the day, the politicians are there because we put them there. We need to find some way in which entities like ours could get together and say, listen, we need to be able to go and tell this is where we are headed, this is where the world is heading. Politicians don't necessarily understand where it is we are or where it is this market is heading. The only way they will know is if we get together and say, listen, this is what is absolutely needed. Look at what's going on over there. Look at what's going on over there. This is what we have in front of us right now. We can actually make this change. It's really incumbent on us to show them, to educate them as to what exactly is going on and to encourage that change. Leadership, a good leader is a good listener too. Mm-hmm. So we need to actually have reach at that point where we could have that kind of discussion to actually take it to the next level. When that's going to happen, how that's going to happen, we live in hope.
Yes, we are the eternal optimists, some of us.
Yeah, you really have to be. Because at the end of the day, if we don't have it, we are going to be just watching on as the world is changing. And we can't just now looking on and seeing things happening out there. And unless we actually get in and get involved in that, we are going to be just caught up in the whole stream after, and it's too late. I was talking to someone yesterday about what is going on overseas. Like at Scotiabank. I had worked in Scotiabank at one point in time, and I visited them last week in Toronto. They have actually created a whole campus that focuses on digitization. They know that the bank is going to be moving in that direction. So they actually have come together with some entrepreneurs and said, you know what, you see this space over here? This is a few $1 million. This is an area where you can sit down and work, come up with solutions, come up with ideas, and start thinking about how it is you're going to be able to change our bank down the road. Now, when that happens, it's going to trickle down to us. Scotiabank is one of the largest, is the largest bank operating in the region. And when they start to make their changes to their infrastructure, it is going to impact on us. They no longer need the tellers. They no longer need the amount of staff that they have right now. Then what is the government going to do? Exactly. So we need to have that balance.
Yeah. Ian?
I think when we think about what was said by excuse me, Gabriel yesterday, he said, and this was quite interesting to me, he said that we are a Bajan company. However, our bank account is not in Barbados. He said that. Think about that. That means no foreign exchange from his business goes into the country. It means that if there's any wealth generated from his business, only the residual wealth enters the country. The real wealth stays across abroad. So it means that BIT is a domicile company in Barbados, but they're building another economy. Think about it. The money flows not into Barbados. So the regulators, and they have to understand that there's a cost to slow regulation. Entrepreneurs basically will find a way. The world is such that there are several of you sitting there with laptops. Any one of you could be running a multi-billion-dollar company as you're sitting right there from your laptop. That's where the world is. What you would find happening is that, yes, we have the intellectual capacity, but that intellectual capacity is being exercised in another country. Jeremy Stevens from the economist from Barbados mentioned that you could set up a company in Estonia for 112 US. So if Estonia offers the entrepreneurs all the facilities and ease of doing business, why does he need to wrestle with the local regulators? Regulators are there to protect, as was said earlier on, to protect us or to protect our economic past. But are they protecting our economic future? Think about it carefully. Because if they are protecting our economic future, that protection begins today. Because if it's not present today, entrepreneurs will simply find a way, and most likely they are going to house their businesses. They may have the facade registered in this particular country, but the operations of it, the real meat of the business, resides in some foreign country.
Thanks, Ian. Rhea, any comments?
Yes, I just want to start by creating a small picture of the purpose of policy and regulation. What we're trying to do here is untether the financial resources in the region so that we can jumpstart economic growth within the region. Yes, that's the whole purpose of this entire session here. And as I look at Dr. Malu in the back, looking very calmly, I think to myself, how many hackathons, how many ideathons, how many entrepreneurship and innovation sessions, Doctor, have you engaged in, directly or indirectly, that have spawned hundreds and hundreds, have you reached thousands yet, of technology-enabled, or not even technology-based, ventures and innovation systems that will fail because there is an inability to monetize it. Monetize meaning monetizing the business model. So the entire objective of this is to be able to untether something, and we because of our siloed and our siloed thinking, unfortunately, it is what it is. We are continuing to cripple the advancement of all of the efforts in the area. And all we need to do, and I'm not trying to make it sound simplistic, is to find a cheaper, easier, faster, more efficient, secure way to move financial and capital resources. And if we structure it according to the targets that we're talking about here, we're talking about people, we're talking about businesses, and what I didn't hear a lot about is that we're talking about governments. And beyond payments, we're talking savings, we're talking loans, we're talking insurance. The ecosystem is huge, yet it's in this big blob of a model. I say all of that to say that we have to begin somewhere. And that somewhere is finding a space to start with, and I always like to use where's the low-hanging fruit? Where's the territory that is easiest that we can experiment with regulators that are most approachable, or while we use those learnings, and I always come back to Haiti, while we use those learnings to transfer over to like industries, like countries in other jurisdictions. And it's very important that we begin to see ourselves, again, start regional, but begin to see ourselves as having transferable ideas and ideologies, and be able to adapt those ideas and ideologies based on experiences elsewhere. Not elsewhere in Canada, not elsewhere in the United States or Japan. Elsewhere here. And so, in a sense, we have to invest in each other's landscapes, if you will, to be able to create a category of understanding across the region in this extremely dynamic space. So policy and regulation, I think, needs to stand out of policy and regulators and move up the value chain to prime ministers who are interested in seeing the economic growth and development of their respective territories. That's the governance system that needs to happen. And with a lack of understanding, as someone alluded to earlier, an understanding of what is a very complex landscape, the easiest place to start is the easiest place to start. Essentially, it is easiest place to start is where you know best. The thing that people attach meaning to first. And then policy begins to have contextual meaning and then can be written or can evolve from that point.
Any comments to Rhea's point, Ian?
I think that the regulators within the territory need to be pushed, definitely. And I think that the push will only come from when they understand that the economic activity that they seek is being conducted from their country, from their territory, but being conducted in other territories outside of the region. And when they understand that the economic value that they would like to achieve is created elsewhere, then they will have the impetus or the desire then to attract that back home.
But Ian, I think the challenge that we have as a Caribbean people, one, is data. Because that value talk about, regulators work with tangibles, so they have to see numbers, right? So it's about how do we get that data in a repository that can be analyzed and shared quickly. And also another thing about our culture is a culture of sharing. We all like to share information, That's been a problem. You talk to a lot of the data collectors, the central bank, back in the days whenever CSO begins to operate properly, that will be their problem because that's been a historical problem. It's about data, right? We need to mine data, the big data, the analytics, whether big or small data. We need to mine that data in order for the regulators, I would think, to reach that position. They're not going to reach it overnight. And I was researching as we look at what we do and what happens differently outside. I was looking at actually the mission statements of a lot of our central banks, right? And also looked at because you have to ask yourself what is it that's happening differently outside. And you have to look at so I look at what was the mission statement or policy statements of the likes of Canada and the UK. And our regional central banks, I looked at the three Jamaica, Barbados, and Trinidad, was all about protection. It's about stability, um, monetary, protecting the currency. A lot of them had that. Whereas when you looked at the value statements or the policy statements or the mission statements of both the Canadian Central Bank and the Bank of England, it's about creating an environment that will provide for the greater good of the people, particularly Canadian. They spoke to of let me read it out. Um, this allows the objective monetary policies to preserve the value of money by keeping inflation low, stable, and predictable. This allows Canadians to make spending and investment decisions with more confidence, encouraging longer term investment in Canada's economy and contributes to sustained job creation and greater productivity. This in turn leads to improvements in our standard of living. That is how they craft their policy. It's about moving their country forward. So whatever frameworks that they are building, it's about that. So their digital economies are going to move faster, and the British one is almost the same. It's about that. It's about long-term longevity of the economy and moving it forward for the greater good and a better life of the persons who live there. It may be implied in ours, but it's not spelled out because that's not the way how they are thinking. So I think a part of it is a fundamental change of the thinking of the regulators, whether it's um, in this direction about the big picture and the holistic looking of the environment. And I mean, this on the first morning, when the acting CEO of TAT, she made a comment, and as to what was their role of TAT. And she said, I have it here, responsible to move the digital economy forward. That was, to me, very pointed, right? They knew they were focused on doing that, but you're not seeing that juxtaposed in the financial regulation. It's really very siloed. Okay, so to me, it's about getting a shift in thinking from the sole protectionism that our regulators focus on into something bigger. Any comments?
I would like to comment by saying that you mentioned data. Data is important, but also important are signals. If I am sitting here and I'm hearing a company does not have a bank account in its country, that's a big signal. If I'm a regulator, that's a big signal. Because if you understand how BID operates, BID is saying to Caribbean people, send me your cash, I will give you Bitcoins. So we in the Caribbean are sending money to BID, but BID is taking that money outside of the region. It's not being kept in the region. If I'm a regulator, that's a big signal to me. I'm concerned because it means what? More foreign exchange leakage. In addition, Jeremy Stevens also said yesterday he did an exercise or case study about the potential of Bitcoin within the region and the central bank having adopted it. If it adopted it years ago, the central bank would have been more profitable. That's a signal. If the central bank would have been more profitable, think about the extent of that profitability in the general economy. does that represent an economic opportunity being missed? The central bank certainly missed it. What about the economy, entrepreneurs in the economy, businesses in the economy? Could there have been a new industry being formed? Could Barbados have become, let's say, a financial hub as a result of that? So signals are very important, and the signals are everywhere. Okay, we just have to look at it and listen to what people have to say. Okay, the central bank went very accommodating and assisted bit in terms of meeting recognition, achieving recognition from a regulatory standpoint. And if that didn't miss them, then I don't know what else to offer up to them. I don't.
Terrance?
Let me just put a slightly different thing. When you talk, when he said yesterday that he doesn't have his funds in Barbados, that doesn't mean it's not in the region, and he could be doing it for reasons other than.
Well, I would say that I'm into cryptocurrencies, and I did have a look at his website, and I think, and I stand to be corrected. I think if it is that you want to wire, let's say, US to BIT, you have to wire it to an account in Hong Kong. I could be wrong, but based on what I saw, I think that is what you have to do.
Okay. Yeah. All right, but thanks. But the other point with respect to the regulators and taking a broader perspective on things, we also have to remember from the regulatory perspective here is that Canada is totally different really to us as the UK. Their exchange rate is something that is largely market driven. It is largely market driven. And they have the reserves and the ability to if necessary, to control it, if necessary. But their markets are large enough to be able to adapt to changes in the exchange rate. We are small, open economies. The most critical and important variable that we have to deal with is the exchange rate. And many times I've been having discussions and talking to people, I always have to stress that the most important variable is not inflation so much. See, in their markets, inflation is critical because inflation helps to go and look at when inflation goes up, then their monetary policy kicks in, the interest rate goes up. When the interest rate goes up, it means that money is going to come to go and get the higher interest rate, which impacts on the foreign exchange rate. There's a whole range of different things happening. That's not the kind of mechanism or transmission that we have in our parts of the world. The foreign exchange rate is the number one thing, which is why Barbados will control it at 2-1 forever, which is why OECS will control it at 2.70 forever. And they will look at what's happened to Guyana, they will look at what happened in Jamaica, and they will say, we're not going there. And they look at us too in Trinidad. The point is, there are different factors that we need to consider when we're comparing ourselves. Having said so, we do need to have a broader perspective as to what it is the regulators are about. When you, as you said just now, when you actually talk to regulators, they are concerned about what is happening within their sphere, what is on their desks right now, as compared to taking a broader perspective and saying, okay, how is this going to impact on the overall economy? How is this going to stimulate growth in these particular sectors or in that particular sector? Is this going to be a good thing for the tourism sector? Is this going to be a good thing for the financial sector overall? I don't think they actually take that holistic approach. It's really what's on their desk at this point in time. What is their mandate? This is what they have to go and do. And in our case, our central bank, we look at, as I said, we look at foreign exchange as being the number one. Inflation is also something we look at. But the most important thing is, no matter how we look at it, it is foreign exchange. Our interest rates are driven by what is going on in the States, for example. The interest rates in the States are to rise. We're going to need to go and raise our rates so that people don't take their foreign exchange from here to go across there to invest. Why? We want to keep the foreign exchange rate here. It's a different mindset. But the point is taken. We do need to have a broader perspective. But the regulator's job is not straightforward one. It's in our part of the world.
I just want to add on to what you're talking about. I think we're missing an opportunity here as well, continuing to keep the discussion a little bit more international, and I always like to use the example of the OECS. I'm glad you brought it up. 9 economies, largely under the same economic model, free movement of financial resources, but 9 independent states, member states, and we're missing the opportunity for experimenting. The legislation is far along, and they remain ready. So when we talk about analysis and we're talking data, 100% ready, has anybody done the analysis on the foregone, the opportunity cost of people taking time off from work to having to go to the bank to go and do whatever, or the cost of crime, people coming out to the bank to do payroll for construction workers and getting robbed, murdered, or otherwise? Has anybody done any analysis on in the governments on the millions of dollars in potential savings in remitting cash benefits for public assistance every month via mobile or via digital means as opposed to checks or cash, or eliminating the inefficiencies of the use of that financial assistance because the money is not being spent in the rum shop. I'm not generalizing, in the rum shop or outside of its primary means and used to actually sustain the livelihood of its original intention. That's analysis, and the analysis does in fact come out of data. So when it was said we talking, analyzing, we're still nowhere. We have not done any analysis because we do not have the data, to Shiva's point earlier today. So in a sense, we are disabling the process, the regulatory process, and the policy process by not having that information and analysis. And I'm saying that is the starting point, and you have countries that are ready at different levels to be able to do that. And once you harness them, and again, I will always say that the CTU is one of the best positioned to be able to be a bridge for that kind of discussion among regulators. You begin to trade the analysis and the information to policymakers and regulators, planting the seeds for them to do that kind of adoption of or diligence in their own territories.
Okay, so I'd like to put out to the floor if anyone has any comments to move up to the microphone or any questions to any of the panelists.
Marie, OECS Commission. I just want to raise a point, but before I raise a point, I want to give an example of something. In 2004, one of our regional banks changed their banking system, and the system came directly from Canada. And over the course of 9 months, there was a young teller in Dominica who basically sat and debugged the entire system and changed the way that that system worked, because that system was not suited for the OECS countries. That actually won a Scotia Excellence Award in 2005 because of his efforts. I say this to say that I heard the example of Scotia having something in Canada right now, looking at how they can improve their product base. My question is, why should we wait for the banks to innovate for us? The rate of innovation by the banks is not sufficient for us at this time. It's a little too slow. We hear the cries of the SMEs, and as Rhea just rightly said, there is a lost opportunity for business. In the OECS, we have 10 islands. Our regulators, the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank and also ECTEL, they regulate on our behalf. But we are at a stage where right now we need financial solutions now, not 5 years into the future or 3 years down the line when the foreign banks bring these solutions to us. This is my contribution.
That's an excellent point. Through my own research, having discussions with 2 international banks, it was said to me, we are not going to get into this area. Our only experience is through the remittance market. And with the Financial Intelligence Unit, the very onerous regulation, the US regulation now on the banking systems of the international banks in particular, because as you said, once you start to get larger, the spotlight is over you. With the millions and millions of transactions being received at 50 US, 50 US, 25 US, 200 US, small quantities, but millions of transactions on an annual basis. The auditing process alone for these major banks has run them into millions of dollars for compliance purposes. And so they are stepping out of doing that because the cost the cost outweighs the potential so-called reward for them. But what we're overlooking is the second-tier banking, not second-tier because they're not good enough. We're missing credit unions. We're missing community banks. We're missing other types of financial institutions that are indigenous to the region and extremely vast in quantity, in number, that are wanting to innovate, but not innovate in the same way as the traditional institutions and international institutions can, that we can actually once again experiment with. And I think Marlon's point in the OECS is very valid. There is a territory waiting and ready. When are we going to come together, at least to pilot an experiment in that territory with certain things?
In yesterday's session, when we talked about entrepreneurship, we did mention the fact that there are signs right now of a group, of an age group, that people, where there seems to be something happening, where people are aware that changes are taking place and they're trying to see how they could adapt those changes to our market. And that age group, you need 20-something, 30-something age group, they hold a lot of promise to doing along the lines that you are talking about, which is trying to see how we could actually find solutions to our problems, as compared to just basically adapting systems from overseas and basically being forced to go and use those systems. So there is hope for that happening.
Yes.
Stefan Bruno from Social Bank. I wanted to jump on this because since you mentioned, for example, there are other types of institutions like credit unions that we can look at. Personally, I worked 2 years with a network of 45 credit unions in Haiti. Actually, Boom Financial Inc. was actually partnered with credit unions. We had introduced the mobile remittance product with a network of credit unions, partly because most of the other banks were already on the international transfer market, so they were considering us more as a competition than anything. So one thing to not, it's not negligible. It's the fact that sometimes there are other challenges that are other than technology. The fact that, for example, credit unions are not for-profit organizations, the culture of the organization is very different from a private company. So when you have a private company, on top of that, an American company, partnering with a traditional credit union network, you have to take care of the corporate culture shock that we'll have between two very different types of institutions, and the fact that the decision-making process is very different. For example, in a private company, you only have to go to the board and you can move very fast. But in a network of credit unions, 45 credit unions with 45 board, basically, and the federation on top of that, when you have to make a decision, it's a very democratic process from bottom to top. So you have two institutions going at different speeds. So that's another thing to take into account also when we're talking about innovation, is aligning the corporate culture of the different organizations that are trying to partner to provide the service, particularly when we're talking about very innovative, high-tech, services like that.
Okay. My experience with credit unions is exactly that. you have to have an infinite amount of patience to go and deal with credit unions when a decision is required, because they have a totally different approach. This is their approach, this is how they live, this is what they're being. But the fact is, do not expect to get the same kind of feedback or results as you would if you were dealing with another type of profit-driven organization. Shiva.
Yes, Shiva.
All right. Yeah, I just want to pick up on something that Terrance mentioned earlier. The 20s to the 30 years old. Those are the, where these ideas are coming from. And what my experience has been is that what I see happening elsewhere, just like how Gylnis did comparison of how central bank here looks at things and opposed to how the UK Central Bank or Bank of England would look at something. We seem to have an approach where these persons with these ideas are not elevated into position where they can actually make a change. And I mean, sad to say, personally, I don't know if I'm being controversial here, we have too much grey hair people clogging up the system. Seriously. I get grey now, so I mean, I've fallen in the category, but we need these fresh thinking ideas. And just to touch on Ian's point on the banking facilities for a digital currency company within the Caribbean, if our banks are more receptive towards these type of innovation, maybe that potential leakage could stay here. But even in that instance, I don't know about their banking, but I know they don't have a BIT license account, and that would mean that they wouldn't be able to get US from US. So I'm not too sure about that. But our banking system here, not only at and Nigel made this point yesterday, it's one thing for the central bank to have an approach. The commercial banking system has a role to play as well in facilitating bank accounts for these type of startups and fintech. Thanks.
Right, and again, we got back to the same SME issues that we talked about yesterday. How do we actually facilitate them? How do we facilitate change? That's the bigger question here. Because we need to change, and everybody's watching at each other wondering, okay, how do we do this? And the commercial banks continue to watch and say, okay, well, nobody's doing anything, and we're going to continue doing what it is we want, or we will bring out the products and services that we think would be in our best interest. And that's how things are going to continue until there is a fundamental change taking place somewhere. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, don't want to hold the microphone, but actually I have a question. Do we know, in your countries, do we know what is the stance of the central bankers of your countries? Do we know if they have a dogmatic approach where they say it has to be a bank-led or operator-led, or do we at least know where they stand so that we can see how to approach them, or is it still unknown from your side?
From our experience at Paywise, it's when you read the Act, the Central Bank Act and the Act that regulates the financial industry, you get a sense that if you have to do anything disruptive within the financial sector, you have to partner with one of the banks. Okay, because when you look at sometimes the capital requirements, okay, for a startup, you have that kind of money, and if you have it, you want to put it into building, okay, your technology and your business model. Outside of that, you have the credit unions or the cooperative structure, okay, because typically, if you are getting into payments or offering financial services, you may have to do some deposit taking or holding of deposits. And if it is that the bank is not willing to work with you, then you may look towards the cooperative structure. And that may, as Terrance mentioned, have its own challenges. Okay? And as you mentioned also, it's not profit-driven. And even if people are profit-minded, you find that because of the cooperative framework, okay, working with many people to get consensus can be a bit of a challenge. You could stymie the development of the initiative that way before you can ever see success.
if I'm not mistaken, Section 51 of the Financial Institutions Act tells you exactly the structure, what you have to do if you have a new product or service, if you are a financial institution that's already licensed. What happens when you are not? Like in Ian's case, when you are brand new and you're a startup, what do you then do? What provisions are made for that? And quite frankly, I don't think there are provisions, and this is why Ian finds himself in a situation where he's talking about, where you basically have to start off either with 15 million TT dollars, I think it's 15 million to start off with.
Correct.
Or you basically have to partner with another institution who's going to say, okay, we're going to look over your shoulders and we'll take whatever percentage that we get out of whatever it is you're doing. So again, it gets back to all of the issues we talk about. There needs to be a change. And the regulators have to recognize that we are in a new era now. The Fintech 3.0 that what was referred to above. Where it is a small entity, small companies that are disintermediating the financial institutions. But yet you want us to go and work with the financial institutions to go and be able to go and provide disintermediation.
Any other comments from the floor? Okay. Well, we'll wrap up this session. I would like to thank our panelists who really have given us food for thought. We still have a lot of work to do in the Caribbean region. A couple other key points is that we need political will. We need somebody to say this is the way we want it done because this is the agenda we have for our territories. Really, that's how it happened. We look at some of the challenges, again, that small companies have. And really, a comment from Rhea was that we are not collecting the data, so we can't analyze the data, right? We have a challenge to that within ourselves as to how we do data collection. And really, for some of us, the challenge is to not give up, keep pushing, keep having the conversation, keep having the lobbying, right? Keep having these sort of sessions, keep writing, keep making public comments. Because really, as we sit here, the world is running past us. And a lot of our challenges that we face now with fragile economies impacted by globalization and all the things that are happening around us will continue to plague us, and we'll continue always to be trying to catch up. So I would like to thank our panelists, Ian T. Allen, Terrance Clarke, Rhea Ching for their contributions this morning. And if you could give them a round of applause. And we now break for lunch.